I'm talking today with Mark Feldschuh and Max Mito from Strongroom.ai. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Good morning.
It's great to have you both here today, and I'm really excited about our chat today because you deal in a level of pharmacy technology that I don't think I've spoken about so far. I'm certainly very interested in AI, and on that note, we'll start with let's let the two of you gentlemen tell us a bit about yourselves. So, Mark, who is Mark Feldschuh?
Thanks, Scott. As you know, my name is Mark Feldschuh. I have been a community pharmacist for many, many years. I owned and operated two pharmacies in Melbourne, and for one of them 33 years, I think it was, which was pretty amazing. And I really liked the idea of systems in the pharmacy, and it just got me that that was the way to operate. And obviously I like things like McDonald's and all of those, and I got pretty good at systems, and I could tell what was going wrong with different things, and I obviously did my best to make sure the customer experience was as good as possible and very professional if possible. As I said, I did that for 33 years. I did sort of new things like compounding at the time, which is probably now about 20 years ago. And at that time, I could see that there were a few problems with consistency of compounding. So I made sure that my pharmacy, it was only one that was doing it, was as good as I could do it. And compounding really made me in a systems approach. I then helped, I joined PSA many years previously. I was on the Victorian State Council for quite a few years, and I chaired the education committee for 10 years actually. Anyway, as I said, I got good with compounding and in particular systems. And then eventually with PSA, I helped actually make sure professional practice standards were as good as possible. I chaired the committee that actually did the professional practice standards for compounding. And then I was on TGA committee, working committee on compounding, and then a few other things like that. I basically thought I was retiring. It was over 10 years ago now, and I became president of PSA in Victoria, which was a great honour, and I thought that was a really good way of retiring from the profession.
Yep.
What that actually let me do was I could go and visit anyone I wanted to with advocacy, and I really, really enjoyed that. And it got me into a lot of other ancillary fields, and I really loved IT and all of those sort of things, and I could never see how we could actually really use or utilise some of the IT things. Anyway, at one stage, it was 2019, and someone actually asked me to look at this particular company. They couldn't make head or tail of it. So I had a brief of what was involved, and it had facial recognition. And famously, I said, this is a solution looking for a problem in pharmacy.
Yep.
I just couldn't see how we could use it reputably in a pharmacy with privacy issues, etc. So I was wearing a particular filter that I thought this was not going to be good. Anyway, luckily, I met Max and he explained what it was doing, and I actually saw that it was entirely different than what I thought. So all of a sudden, my view of the particular company and the particular projects they're involved with entirely different. I'll let Max explain that part of it in a minute, but I came in as a practicing pharmacist and with certain filters which happen to be quite important for the business.
Yeah, that's great. And certainly 33 years in pharmacy around Melbourne, you would be relatively well known, I would imagine. And with the PSA here in Victoria, you'd be relatively well known. Some of our listeners across the other states may not have heard you essentially, but for anyone interested, Mark's got a great history on LinkedIn, which will include the link for that as well to go and have a look at. And I'm sure, Mark, I could say that if someone wanted to reach out to you, you'd be more than happy to connect and have a chat with them.
Certainly.
For sure. So on that note, Max, you're a much younger version of both of us, and not that there's anything wrong with grey hairs these days, but who is Max Mito?
Yeah, so thanks, Scott. So yeah, unfortunately, my career is a little less experienced within the pharmacy space, but yeah, really came from Strongroom. The idea for Strongroom, I should say, from my international background. So as you can hear, my accent's a bit of a mutt. So
Yeah.
was born in Japan,
Yep.
grew up in Hong Kong, and actually, it's funny that we're now in COVID because while I was living in Hong Kong, we were hit by SARS. Went back to the UK for a very short time. Went back
Mm-hmm.
to Hong Kong after that, and then finished up school in Japan, where I started my first company. Wasn't anything to do with technology. It's actually something I started when I was 16 and sort of snowballed, but
Mm-hmm.
exited out of that business, came to Australia for university, and then started Strongroom. But yeah, the idea of Strongroom has really been with me from that international upbringing, where
Mm-hmm.
I had to see my parents collate our medical records, our vaccination records, and just knew that there was some sort of gap there. And so I teamed up with two of my friends. One, Chris Dure, he's our chief innovation officer and a childhood friend of mine.
Yep.
So we initially started things off, and we're soon joined by my other co-founder, Kieran Start, who's our chief technology officer, and he's a university friend of mine.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so we came in with a perspective of wanting to deploy facial recognition and matching people with their medical records. But the first project that we undertook was just too significant in scope. And we found that, most importantly, the landscape across the medical IT ecosystem just wasn't quite ready for it at the time. And one of the modules that we were really looking at was around how controlled drugs and drug management was being done. And we felt like there was a lot of room for improvement. So we teamed up with a few pharmacists initially up in Geelong in Victoria. And yeah, and then at that point, we looked at it and found that, yeah, we're going to start Strongroom. And so, yeah, so that's really my background. And yeah, yeah. And by the way, my background's in economics and history at University of Melbourne. So, I think we'll talk about this later on in the podcast, but I think it brings us a bit of a different perspective to the medical industry.
So, gents, thanks for that introduction to both of you. There's a great breadth of experience there in these two fields, and I think it ties nicely back into pharmacy. And I was certainly interested following my podcast recording or episode with Zamil Solanki that we did a couple of weeks ago, which led to this today, because I know Zamil's become involved in this as well. But I saw on one of your research notes, that you've got over 900 Australian pharmacies now using your platform. Is that correct?
So currently we've deployed in pretty close to about 500, and
Yep.
we're expected to be in about 900 to 1,000 pharmacies by the end of this year.
This year, got it. Okay. And so for anyone listening today, what's the basis of this platform? What does it do for a community pharmacy?
So at the moment, it's an end-to-end process. So it looks after the patient from the patient identification all the way to the claiming aspect of it, depending upon what module you're using. But from a more of a macro point of view, it's consolidated traditionally independent software solutions. So if we look at, for example, the stage supply workflow, and if it was a Schedule 8 medication, if you weren't using Strongroom at the moment, then you would have to be purchasing a separate drug register system, different medication adherence system, and you'd still be tracking a lot of the transactions on paper. So as you can see, there's 3 different systems in place and 3 separate areas from which you record your data.
Yes.
Now, what Strongroom does is, if a patient opts into the process, is identify the patient on stage supply. And at that point, you supply the medication and you can record any sort of adherence digitally through our system. And then at the end of each month, it works out all the mental arithmetic around what you can claim for the services that you provide.
Yes.
And so, yeah, this is, as you can see, there's quite a bit of automation involved, as well as a lot less data inputting as well.
Yeah, and I'll come back to that in a second, but Mark, I might just come to you on that point then as well. So from a pharmacist point of view, what does that mean inside a pharmacy? Can you give us an example of how this would work, or with a patient or a client that this would work?
Yeah, I didn't add that I do sort of work via the pharmacy board with pharmacists that might have conditions on their practice. So it's
Yes.
very rigorous type of procedure, and each time it has to be approved by the pharmacy board if it is.
Yeah.
What happens is I have been able to, and probably about at least 50% of those times it involves drug of addiction issues. And
Okay.
what I mean is the actual recording or just the whole process of drug of addiction, anything. And so I've seen it from the other side, and sometimes I wish I could tell the particular pharmacist about this product, but it's usually too late, and it's unprofessional to bring in any product information. The bottom line is that this actually, for a start, makes the whole process recording very rigorous.
Yeah.
And in particular, if anything does go wrong, the audit is just so much better than anything else. So you've got the audit with straight digital files. But the other advantage, where it's way ahead of anyone else at the moment, is there's a facial recognition add-on that you can put in, and for things like for the methadone dispensing for ORT. And there you can, with approval, which is basically 100%, you can actually make sure it's the right patient that you're administering to. So it makes that whole process much easier. And the audit is, if something does go wrong, if a patient says they didn't get it, or someone else come in or whatever, you can audit and double check that, which is very powerful.
Powerful. So so unlike a system that I might have been used to from, say 10 to 15 years ago, this is the methadone clients walked into the pharmacy, walked up to a camera. Max, that's right?
Correct. Yeah.
And they're on a database with a matching picture, a bit like we might see on some of the American president type movies. You don't go any further unless the computer tells you that this face matches the database. The pharmacist, no doubt, still dispenses the methadone.
Just go back one though. I would. The analogy for me be more like your phone.
Okay.
Just looking into the phone.
Yes.
That's all it is. And the info doesn't go anywhere. It's just digits.
It stays within that pharmacy database.
Correct. But,
okay.
Yeah. So it is high tech, but it's not unreasonable. It's pretty obvious after it's been explained.
Sure, and I guess too, then from a client perspective, it's much more rigorous for them as well. Like they would then almost act more appropriately in most instances, if I could use that example.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we've been getting from the pharmacies that have been fully utilizing this feature is really, for patients, the key driver for them to be on the system is that they have a reduced wait time within the pharmacy, and they just get their dose a lot quicker. So from a convenience factor, it plays a major impact.
Yes.
I think, there's enough rigorous dispensing protocols in place that, when you're giving a particular patient that might have had a history of behavioral problems, the system can flag them that you need to properly supervise this particular patient's dose. But then at that point as well, especially for locum pharmacists or part-time pharmacists that aren't working in a particular pharmacy for whatever a long duration, where they have trouble identifying patients, it's a lot of pressure for them to also be dispensing 20 methadone patients at once in the morning. And so this system really automates a lot of that decision process, and allows for them to go, okay, are you, Michael, who's in front of me? Yep, great. I'm going to give you a dose, and it just automates that entire process as well.
So the time, there must be a time saving involved then, Max, is there?
Quite significant time savings, yeah. Yeah. So especially if you're over 30 patients, you'd be saving about 30 seconds up to 2 to 3 minutes, depending if you're coming from an electronic system over to our system. If it's a paper system coming onto our system, then for each patient search, you'll be saving about 2 to 3 minutes per patient.
Okay.
And it's similar, if I can add, it's quite similar to, it was well before your time, both Scott and Max, is that you had to handwrite repeat forms at one stage.
Okay.
And I do remember writing it, and sometimes when it was, the writing a repeat form took longer than dispensing the medicine. And I remember when I was really busy, I was almost shaking with writing the repeat form, all the rubbish, name, address, if they had quite a few repeats, was just awful. So this is a whole quantum change. And the other one, which we haven't got to, is with the pharmacy board, you've got requirements as a proprietor pharmacy to double check that all the systems are in place in a pharmacy. Mm-hmm. There are a reasonable number of what I'll call remote owners. So they're not managing that particular pharmacy, but there is still an onus on them to make sure that the professional practice standards are kept up. And the obvious one, the one that I'm always sort of seem to be in the middle of, is that have they checked that there's a drug of addiction register?
Yep.
Yeah, and it's someone has checked it every month, for instance. Mm-hmm. So has it regularly been checked? Now, this way you can do it remotely. So it just reduces the issues. It certainly is not to be seen by itself, but it certainly does help with that.
So Mark, if I send that back to you, then and you're right. I know quite a few pharmacists that are remote owners. You're saying that with this platform, one or several of their pharmacies could have this system in play, and they could be sitting in their place of residence, which could be hundreds of kilometres away, once a month. Go in and actually check that this platform is working and that the audit system is up to date.
Well, they really need to. They have to. By law, this only becomes an issue when it's an issue.
Yes.
And then it becomes a serious issue. And you usually would have to defend yourself at a court of law or a pharmacy board or whatever the state instrumentality is.
Yeah, and under the potentially, I'll say what would be existing systems is that if you had to do that, or if you were acting remotely, you'd either have to go to the pharmacy and physically cite all of the logs and registers, or if you did end up in a court of law, you'd actually have to produce all of that documentation or dispensing records effectively. But that then leads Max back to you then. So I've understood that from the pharmacist behind the counter, the clients come in, had their dispensing for the day. What happens next then? Because again, it's obviously got to be more than that. You mentioned earlier on that this goes across a couple of the different fields.
Yeah, so I think we spoke a lot about opioid replacement therapy and stage supply, but it also links into the drug register as well. But sorry, Scott, are you referring more towards the end-to-end process, or are you talking about different?
Well, possibly both. So we'll cover both off. But yeah, end to end to start with, because again, something that you sent me showed me a significant time saving because this does cover an end to end process. And I know, correct. How busy pharmacists that I've been involved with are. And if you can save a couple of minutes, per client every day, then that gives you some, opens the door for some other things to be done.
Yeah, that's right. So, going back to, a stage supply patient that might be coming in 2 to 3 times a week, or, alternatively, an opioid replacement therapy patient, the time savings that when we initially conducted a case study was quite interesting because what we found was that going through the paper records and actually finding their book alphabetically, if you've got more than 30 patients within your facility, there might be, a number of mistakes that have come, from an alphabetical system. The previous locum pharmacist that I was working the day before might have been in a rush and put that book in a different place. There's just a million different ways in which, paper records can be misfiled and mismanaged in that sense. So what this really does is really crystallize who's presenting themselves in front of a facility, gives you a huge amount of certainty that that's them in front of them. And on top of that,
Yes.
you'd be clicking the face search going like, okay, cool, John. And if you're uncertain that the photo that's on file is actually them, you might be able to also ask them for another identifier. What's your birth date? Cool. All right. I know that this person's in front of me. And from that point, when you do click the dispense function within our software, it works out the drug register aspect of the compliance. So
Yes.
obviously it does all that aspect. If it's on stage supply, it also works out your medication adherence set schedule. So it can prompt the patient to actually sign off on each transaction, which is a 7 CPA requirement. And then finally, at the end of each month, you just have to review all your patients. And as I mentioned before, we work out the mental arithmetic around which patients are your most fiscally valuable to claim against a 7 CPA. Because if you're running a program with like 20, to 30 patients, you can only claim up to 15. So then this works all that part out. And then, of course, there's this auditing trail for 7 years. So we've got an extensive backup system in place. So you know that, you're not going to misplace any of these records.
As well. Yeah. So Mark, coming back to you then on that, then there was obviously a part of your input into here was actually getting the pharmacy board approval for this.
No, I have to say it wasn't.
Okay.
I've made sure it did happen, but no, the team before me did it very professionally, and I haven't had to step in at all. Every question I had has been answered. So I wish I could take credit, but no.
Oh, that's excellent. All right. So then, Max, that comes back to we've spoken to the end-to-end process, but let's talk about the scope that this platform could actually play in pharmacy and I think into other medical facilities associated with pharmacy.
Yeah, so we've got a few exciting announcements coming up later on this year. So obviously our ambitions within the community pharmacy is to really expand upon this automation trend that we've got going on. So, not just within controlled drugs, but we've got other professional services that are coming up that is going to be quite exciting to discuss, hopefully at a future podcast with you, Scott. But we've also got our own drug register coming out for aged care and for hospitals this year, and actually at the end of this month. So we're very excited to be working with new partners in those verticals, and there's a lot happening
coming up. And look, obviously some of that's still to be released, but I might just ask one layman's question. So if we were talking about a hospital or a aged care facility, are we suggesting then that the nurse or medical practitioner could have a handheld PDA and scan the patient's face in the bed? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So, we've got a very collaborative approach going into aged care and into hospitals with various partners. But we see facial recognition to be a really key part of essentially a drug trolley doing drug rounds. And essentially, I guess a key question that might be for some of the listeners is, what sort of hardware requirements, software requirements it takes to deploy our facial recognition engine. So essentially, it's just any webcam or any camera that you have, and essentially you can deploy our software on any type of hardware as long as it's 64-bit, which is pretty much all hardware these days. So we sort of see this really becoming a ubiquitous tool across aged care and hospitals around identifying patients and then administering the medication.
Yeah, so on that basis then, because again, Mark, obviously quite a few pharmacies do dispense to aged care facilities. I know that's I'm not sure what percentage it is these days, but there was a period of time where a lot of pharmacies were dedicated to an aged care facility or even in some cases a hospital where that facility didn't have a dedicated dispensary. Does this then tie back to that client's filed in the dispensing platform.
I'll just slightly correct you.
That's right.
In a nursing home or aged care facility,
Yep.
I don't believe that there's any pharmacy anywhere that has embedded pharmacist.
Okay.
Whereas hospital obviously
Does.
All the majors do, and many of the privates do. Okay. What's happened now with the Royal Commission, everything's sort of under review and dramatically, and it's probably sped up things as quickly as COVID has for normal IT. So if I can say what the sort of the ultimate is, that the pharmacist's role in medication management is basically to help make sure that the right patient gets the right medicine at the right time.
Yes.
So that's their role. And so you've got supply, which we'll go through in a sec, and then you've got now something that's been mandated from the 1st of January next year because of the Royal Commission, which the government has agreed to, which is medication reviews in the aged care facilities, RMMRs.
Okay.
So that'll happen. The supply side, what we're aiming for, and you should see it this year, is that to make sure that the patient does get the right medication at the right time, and you can use facial recognition for that.
Okay.
So we'll be then coordinating it with the supply pharmacist in normal pharmacy, normal community pharmacy. So it's our job to make it all integrated.
Integrated, yeah. So now I noticed, I think it was on your website or one of your documents, that you're currently integrated with Fred Dispense. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah.
So in effect, again, if I can use this as an example, Mark, then if a pharmacist was doing a RMMR or in actual fact in the future a HMMR, they could be using facial recognition for that home medication management review as well.
They can. It probably wouldn't save too much time to double check which patient, but where it should come, and this will be, I would suggest, probably more next year than this year, is that all the RMMR data will be accessible to both the supply pharmacists and the RMR pharmacists. So there'll be a lot more integration there, but there you've got a lot of privacy issues. The technical side. Sorry, Max?
Sorry, what I was just really wanting to highlight, the benefit of these sort of processes is that, really you've got a huge amount of pressure coming from a lot of different areas at the moment on pharmacists. So really what we see our role playing is, ensuring that we facilitate and ensure that technology is there to support the ability to achieve these KPIs. And so with RMMRs and the way that they're currently being conducted, it's still a massively manual process. So we've discussed a little bit about facial recognition's role in the community pharmacy space, but the way that we see this really happening within aged care is, as you've been alluding to, Scott, integrating into dispensing software, as Marcus has been also alluding to with RMMRs, and making sure that that data is there, really making sure that that double entry across different facilities is not happening, and really facilitating the service pharmacy, RMMR pharmacist, prescribers, and aged care facilities to be working cohesively together, and just automating the RMMR process so that a lot more essentially can be conducted throughout the year.
The hidden agenda there is that the government has agreed to have RMMRs in aged care. And at the moment, the whole process is not at all integrated. It's totally silo-based, and that obviously has to be addressed. So we think we've got some technical solutions for that.
for that going forward. No, look, I'm very excited about this because, and thank you very much, Mark, for the compliment earlier on for my age, but I am probably older than I look, and I'm looking forward to it. One day in the distant future, when I am in the aged care facility, that the technology at play, is quite exciting, and I think, I'll only use this word once, but the whole COVID environment at the moment is driving a significant amount of change. And focus away from, I'm not saying non-essential areas. I think some of the things that we have been focusing on in the past has been critical, potentially around professionalism and culturally important, but sometimes they've been done at the detriment of just getting some really good tech platforms up and running. And that's what I'm kind of so excited about with this then. So, and again, you mentioned, Max, 400 pharmacies on the platform today. So that's a significant chunk of pharmacies that are obviously going, and you've obviously got some in the pipeline coming forward. But this is then a two-stage approach. It's getting more pharmacies on the platform from a stage one perspective, but then those pharmacies that are on now are then going to actually head into potentially another module of this in the aged care facilities.
That's correct, Scott. So, really the aim of the game is two things: consolidation and automation, and that's what we hope to achieve with what we do within community pharmacies. I think another reason why we've had so many people interested in joining us is that not only is our products today, I think, the strongest critics might say we're marginally better than what's currently out there. But, really what people are doing when they switch over to our platform is the vision. They're buying into the vision of what we're building in the future, and we build very quickly for all these various tools. So if you look at our company timeline very quickly, Scott, sorry, it's a small tangent, but 2019, we released our opioid replacement therapy module. 2020, we did our controlled drug register stage supply modules, and we completely rebuilt our ORT program from the ground up. And this year in 2021, we've got aged care and hospitals coming out. So the momentum behind us is massive. And, I think that's what's getting these pharmacies very excited to come on board. And, we hope that, not just in aged care, but we also address fundamental problems around medication management, around polypharmacy. Ultimately, one thing I forgot to mention at the beginning, but the company's ultimate vision is to eliminate adverse drug events, which is correct, a huge problem to be tackling with many variables. So generation one is this platform, but generation two will be the AI analytics side. So that's exactly it, Scott.
Yeah, and I think that's the two key points that I've taken away from today is that one, it's to reduce adverse interactions. So really kind of pull that into a very tight regime. But more importantly, any technology platform coming into any business, but we're talking specifically about pharmacy here, should be aimed at actually taking a chunk of burden away from the very busy pharmacists that we've got today. And I think that's, if anything, a pharmacist going forward should have the challenge of, well, which platform do I take? Not, no, I'm not going to do this one because I'm happy still writing things into an exercise book as such.
That's exactly it. And I think we try to make the onboarding process as painless as possible as well, but there's always a lot of work to do there.
Yeah. So with your current clients and clients coming on board this year, is it across the eastern seaboard, or are you spread right across the nation at this stage? How far have you gone?
Quite a lot on the eastern side. We're hoping to be moving a little bit more in the west. We do have a few pharmacies up on the western coast, but we hope to be making more traction in regards to that very soon.
Very soon as well. No worries. Yeah. And gentlemen, I guess we're coming to the end of our time, but we've still got a little bit of opportunity to chat. Is there anything from your perspective that we haven't covered off so far today?
Well, I'm very excited about where the facial recognition will be used in such places as aged care, which I haven't had a chance to really explain, and it's more longer term, but you could say that there's also there can be change in facial expressions, especially over time. So you might find that you can use these facial recognition programs to aid in diagnosis of different conditions.
Okay.
And we've been working on that with university clinical trials, but it's way, way too early to see where it's going. But I will guarantee that something's going to happen, and it'll be very unexpected, even to us. But we don't know where that's going yet.
So what you're saying is that at some stage into the future, there could be an algorithm within the system that scans my face and picks up a difference that wasn't there a week ago or a month ago. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. The classic, which we're not claiming to be doing at all, but I was involved with a program that was looking at stroke, trying to work out when a stroke particularly happened. Yep. Again, it's just a theory at the moment, but if someone has a stroke in a nursing home and there's manifestations in facial expression, it might be the tracking backwards. You can see when the person did not have the stroke. So I'm trying to be careful, not saying it's a diagnosis at all.
No. Got it.
But it just might be something that gives someone an indication of what's going on. So that's just quite exciting. Again, it's used with a lot of other things, but things will come out of that we don't expect. That's a type of thing.
Yeah, got it. Well, very, very futuristic. Yeah, Max?
Yeah, well, look, one project that we can, we're happy to talk about, and it's with our clinical research that's currently happening in London with the Chelsea Westminster Hospital. So with that particular clinical trial, what we're doing is tracking facial biomarkers for dementia-related diseases. So we're looking at, for example, vascular dementia and its progression. So the hypothesis is really, as that disease progresses, it really inhibits the use of facial muscles. And of course, we correlate those differences between a healthy subject and for right now, severe subject. We correlate those two differences towards, MRI scans, blood tests, psychometric assessments to see if there's any correlation. So as Mark mentioned, it's a bit too early to really comment on those clinical trials, but you can really see the way that, the potential impact if this was successful, what it could potentially have on the healthcare system.
Yeah, no, excellent. That's great. Gentlemen, that's been great to chat today. I really appreciate you taking the time to do that. I think that there's going to be some other episodes come out of this into the future, so we're going to stay in touch. In terms of getting in contact, if anyone's listening today and wants a little bit more information, I've obviously mentioned we'll connect both of your LinkedIn profiles and your Strongroom.ai website. Is that the best opportunity for people to touch base?
Absolutely. We're very active on LinkedIn, so just get in touch with us there.
Do it that way. All right. Gentlemen, thanks for your time today. It's been great to chat.
Thank you very much, Scott.
Thank you, Scott. Much appreciated.